personal relationships and empathy often seems really empty, and at the worst case, sometimes even terrible. It tends to kind of make us distant from each other. So I can share a similar kind of experience, I think. For me, I grew up in a very conservative Christian environment, and the idea of engaging with people who were gay, whether Christian or not, was very foreign to me, until I had a housemate who was gay. And then through that became to understand some of the pain of his kind of journey and some of the pain of the way that he'd been treated by Christians. Through that was then invited to go along and be part of a large group of people who are gay Christians talking about their own journey and experiences. So one of the most powerful experiences in my life in the last probably decade was sitting in a room with about 30 people. I was one of 2 straight people there, and just going around the room sharing stories of pain and suffering, often at the hands of Christians. Being able to put yourself into the shoes of another, that kind of empathetic resonance with another person, is a really powerful way of coming to know things and to being changed in the way that you perceive the world. For me as a Christian, that's actually connected in with the way that God has made us. We're not just kind of brains in vats, we're not just about kind of rational truths, we're actually creatures that are made for relationships with each other, and ultimately relationship with God, I would say. And so knowledge always has that personal dimension. And God has a stake himself in being known that way and entering into our relationships. Yeah.
Okay, thanks guys. All right, so in a few minutes we'll be opening up for questions, but before we do, I want to grasp the nettle a little bit. And we've been hedging around kind of life-changing decisions. A few that have been mentioned have been becoming religious when you're not, and implicitly the reverse, becoming non-religious when you were. And the other one that's come up quite a bit is obviously becoming gay, or announcing that you're gay. Now, given that 2 of you work in kind of a pastoral situation, I take it, I want to ask, how do you personally face, or how do you personally work with a situation where somebody is making a life decision like that, going through a big decision like that? And what's something we as students and workers and teachers, what are some thoughts you have on helping friends going through those processes of decision making when the stakes are really quite high? So this might be someone from the Atheist League deciding to become religious, somebody from a synagogue or from a Christian group deciding to give up their faith, or somebody in those circumstances becoming gay, or other decisions like getting married, having children, so on. Sometimes they're forced on us, like when somebody dies. So if you could talk a little bit about how you face those situations with people that you work with, and what are some things we could think about when we face those?
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes up in my work is conflict around change. So a young person deciding to marry outside of the faith, for example, or a couple that have different attitudes towards religion, where one part of the couple has decided to be more religious and the other one is sort of remaining the same as they were before. And I think what's really vital in all of that is genuine openness and respect for people making their own choices about what is right for them. And I guess I take that from, my counselling is sort of informed by my cross-cultural practice. So, to give you an example, I was up I was out in Alice Springs, and we had scheduled a series of workshops at schools with fun people that are going to come, an Aboriginal person, a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian. The 4 people would come and do fun stuff with primary school kids for a week in different schools all over Alice. And I showed up on Sunday afternoon for the meeting, and the Aboriginal person that we had scheduled was a teacher. She was very capable, and she wasn't at the meeting. Instead, there was an elder, recognised elder, who seemed to be quite capable, and another Aboriginal woman next to her who was completely introverted, didn't say a word, very, very quiet. And it became clear to me that this introverted woman, this artist, was going to be the representative for the Aboriginal sort of heritage within this program, and the program was going to fall flat. And so I ducked out of the meeting, got on my mobile, rang the other lady who was supposed to be there, let's call her Rachel. Rachel, where are you? And she says, do you still need me? And I said, yes. I mean, I just flew down from Sydney. I'm expecting you to be at this meeting. Where are you? She said, oh, I'll be there in a minute. And so she hops into her car, and the minute she walks through the door, the meeting turns to ice. It just, I could tell something terrible has just happened. I can't tell what it is, but some line had been crossed. And the elder is very unhappy and very, very reserved, and the other woman is reserved, and the person that I invited in, the teacher, is uncomfortable, and it's just like, whoa, something just hit here. And when I actually, there was another Aboriginal woman who was sort of our guide there, and she explained to me that the elder is worried about succession, and when she dies, she needs to have someone to take her place as an elder, and her plan was for her daughter, it was the quiet woman, to get some experience in leadership. And this is Arrernte country, and she, as an Arrernte elder, has every right to determine who's going to represent the Arrernte people in this program. You're a white guy in a suit from Sydney who has decided to change her plan and to bring someone else in. And so she's not very happy with you. And what made sense in that was a simple question about whose call is it? Whose call is it? And to some extent, it was her call in terms of who Aboriginal people would be represented by. It was my call in terms of the program we organised with schools. And so there was this conflict. I had a right to honour my commitment to schools based on commitments that were made to me. She had a right to determine how Arrernte people would be represented in Arrernte country. We came up with a compromise, but that's not the point. The point is about that genuine sort of holding back and saying, whose decision is it? When we're thinking about someone's life, particularly with parents and kids or siblings, whose decision is it? Who's going to have to live with this decision for the rest of their lives? And are they being supported in the path that they've chosen for themselves? Now, of course, we can offer advice, particularly if somebody wants advice. We can ask questions if we think that the person is not thinking through the evidence and not thinking through what they're doing, maybe overlooking something. We can gently offer different perspectives. But at the end of the day, there needs to be that absolute respect for those boundaries, and it's not my life that's at stake. It's one person here, whether to be religious or to be not religious, who has a deep question of conscience that they need to navigate, and it's for them to make that call and for others to be supportive.
I really like this question. Thanks, Andrew. It forces us to think not just as a panel, but actually everyone here today, how would we help a friend who was going through this kind of moment of confrontation about something really serious and significant? And I want to completely agree with Rabbi Zellman. I think that we all agree here on this panel that that is something that is a choice that belongs to an individual. For me, that's because you have an individual relationship with God that you're held accountable in, and you need to make that choice yourself. No one else can make it for you. But at the same time, I'm going to say something maybe slightly counterintuitive, which is that it's not necessarily the most helpful thing at that point to step back and say, whatever you choose is okay. Or as much as we want to emphasise respect, at that point just to kind of leave without offering any guidance or any contribution. I actually think that that contributes for most of us to a real sense of anxiety. If you're wrestling with a question about what is actually good in my life or good in the world around me, and everyone that you go and ask that question to just says, oh, whatever you choose, you're kind of left with no definition, nothing to grab hold of in order to make those decisions. So my kind of counterintuitive proposition to you is that we're actually best at helping each other come to a clear understanding of what the truth is when we're clear ourselves and when we're willing to articulate that gently and respectfully to each other, focusing on that process. Have you looked at the evidence? But when you're actually able to clearly say, no, this is what I think. And then to call other people to say, actually, I think this is worth you checking out yourself and persuading and seeking to engage with each other at that level.
Dan, I really like your response, simply because it may be more difficult to have to tell a friend or a loved one that you think that the decision they want to make is the wrong decision. But by sharing your opinion with other people, you're giving them the experience and the knowledge that you've developed over your years, and you're giving that to them for them to decide based on this group experience. And I feel like that's the best way you can really move forward. Being kind of an advocate of the mind here on this panel, I'd say, I feel like it is really important to have all the options laid out for you, and that can be very confronting. But with your friends, family, professionals, that's how I would look at making some of these high-stake decisions. Really thinking about it with the people that have had these kind of experiences and who know best.
Thanks, guys. So what I note from all of that is it's important to give time for that, whether it's conversation with others, time to read and reflect, or spend time thinking about such decisions and not be rushed into them. On that note, and not to rush into questions, we're going to do some questions from you guys. But given that we're changing the direction of the flow here, maybe you would like to just chat with the person next to you for a couple of minutes just to sound out your thinking on a topic, or sound out your question so you can warm yourself up. And then someone will run around with a microphone so that we can all hear you. I'll nominate who is to answer the question in the order of appearance. I'll try and cover everybody, but you might like to pick up on some of the many things that we've just really scratched the surface on, just to remind you of those. We talked about the content of decisions, so it might be a kind of existential decision, or it might be a political decision. Also, the process of decision. How do you go about convincing or persuading yourself? What is it? What are the evidence factors that are involved? We talked about believing our own stories and being quite, what's the word? Sometimes inflexible about those stories. And so that it can be quite hard. You get in a rut and it's hard to get out of them. And then, of course, being in situations where you're confronted with lots of people who believe different things about the world, how do you navigate that in a respectful, open, friendly way? So maybe just kind of 2 minutes max of think about those things, and then if you want to ask a question, if you want to risk or be courageous, we'll send the microphone around. Who would like to ask a question? I'll try and get around everybody. There's a guy up here with a really big grin. Oh, what's your name? Okay, Jordan, thanks.
Hello. My question to the panel is, if you could, what do you think is the strongest argument that your opponent could make, like a religious or irreligious, or between Judaism and Christianity, for example? What is the strongest argument that your opponent could make to solidify their position of faith or lack of faith?
An easy one to begin with. Thomas.
I'll keep it short and sweet. For me, the strongest evidence would just be some kind of physical presentation of evidence. I think an omnipotent being would be able to know what type of evidence it would take to change my mind and many of my atheist colleagues. And with his kind of power, it shouldn't be too hard to present some kind of tangible physical evidence that could change the minds of the entire world.
Thanks, Tom. Dan or Zalman, would you like to respond to that one?
The lion lying with the lamb, complete and absolute world peace, would be pretty persuasive.
I find the question a little bit problematic, as you can tell. Not because I can't think of lots of great arguments for not believing, like if I'm taking kind of Thomas's position, because I wrestle with them all the time. I'm a little bit loath just to say what someone else would think, though. That's part of my problem. For me, if I'm just talking personally, what are the main things that I struggle with that would make me question my own faith? To be perfectly honest, it's often the behaviour of other people who share the same beliefs as me, who claim to be following the same God and yet seem to live in a way that's really out of step with that. And that sometimes really shakes me, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm Scott, and I'm not going to tell from the shirt I am an atheist, but I'm just wanting to know, particularly from...
I thought you were a Pastafarian.
Particularly from the non-atheist, sorry Thomas, but Thomas is welcome. Given we're talking about changing of minds, how does that square with religion? I know not all religions, but many religions have this, what I would call a divine gun to the head. Don't believe us or don't follow us and you'll go to hell, or some variant of some eternal torture. So how, if you're talking about the free will to change your mind, how do you square that away with having this divine eternal gun held at your head?
Thanks, Scott.
That's for Thomas, I take it. I think we would be sympathetic to that, whether you're atheist or Christian, that it's actually just a question of whether it's true or not, right? Sure, it's a massive sanction for being wrong, but the question isn't the size of the sanction, it's the matter or not whether the sanction is real. Surely that, and we would agree on that. I don't see any difference in the structure of the argument to an atheist who argues very strongly that to believe that religion poisons the world, for example, that there's a kind of sanction there for religious belief, that if you continue in this, you actually do harm to yourself and to the community around you. That seems to me the same kind of argument for why you should desist from what you're doing. The size of the sanction is different, but the question about how you decide it is whether or not it's true. And for Christians, I think that gives deep urgency for why we try to persuade each other of our position. Yeah.
I love the question. I think that it would be nice if people were choosing to be religious purely based on their conviction rather than fear. And in fact, scholars have grappled with this very question, because in a way it doesn't make sense to command someone to believe in God. If that person doesn't believe in God, they won't accept a command from a non-existent God. And if they already believe in God, then why are you commanding them? And yet, I agree with the premise of your question, because there are traditions about where God seems to get quite aggro in the Bible with people who choose not to believe in God. And it's a very good question. I don't have a good answer to it.
Thomas, did you want to add any comment?
I didn't really have too much to add. It is something that I've noticed with a lot of religious people, that they do seem to believe out of fear, and it's often the way that the argument is presented to me at O Week, for example. We have quite a number of people coming up to us presenting, Pascal's wager or some other variant of, if you don't believe in God, then this will happen. And I obviously don't find the fear tactics particularly compelling.
Okay, all right. Dan has a comment on that.
Yeah. I personally would agree strongly with that. As someone who knows quite a lot of religious people, I can't think of anyone that I know who I would say is a convinced Christian who believes on the basis of fear. I don't find it a plausible argument than you do. What I would say is that Christians believe that this is an outcome of either believing or not believing. It's not the reason for belief. It's a statement about just what we understand to be reality, whether you live in relationship with God or not. And again, at that level, I don't see that it's particularly different to the sort of claim that an atheist might make about the social effect of religion. There's an outcome, an effect of your believing or not believing. Not necessarily that that's a reason for believing.
Hey, my name's Caleb, I'm a Christian. Just kind of playing off the fear factor of playing into what you variously believe. What sort of elements of your various belief systems do you think are compelling about what you believe. And like, I know that for the Christians, you know, it's kind of like, oh, you get heaven, you get eternal life and things like that, but that's kind of a little bit airy-fairy. Like, are there things that are more compelling for, you know, practical here, now, that sort of thing?
I'm fascinated by the question because I'm reading a book at the moment called by a philosopher who argues that what we find compelling is actually a function of our cultural beliefs. And so it's one of those interesting kind of parts of our society that, you know, 500 years ago, people found belief in God deeply compelling. You would have been thought crazy not to believe in God. Whereas now you would see the kind of weight of evidence tends to lead the other way. What's changed in the plausibility structures in our society to make you believe one way or the other? That's a very interesting question. And so when you say, are there things about the here and now that make your belief compelling? I would say that's based on a set of assumptions that compelling beliefs are ones that have implications for the here and now, not the kind of there and then. And that actually changes the weight of evidence for Christians, because Christians have always believed that what's actually most significant about our faith is what it says about your future beyond life, not just in this life. Having said that, that's a kind of more philosophical reflection, and I am a philosophy student. Having said that, there are, I think, real things that kind of interact with our plausibility for the here and now. I kind of mentioned some of those in my own story about becoming a Christian. I think that there's a way in which we're created for personal relationships, and whether that's through the experience of empathy or community, or we have them in all sorts of kinds of places. I would say that's fundamental to how we're made to be, because God made us that way. And when we live in a relationship with God, we actually find something that satisfies some really deep parts of the way we're made to be. Yeah, and I find that deeply kind of plausible. For me, that's centred on the action of God stepping into history in Jesus. It's the sign that he chooses to be in a relationship with us, so that he's kind of outside all of our conditions of experience. He's capable of coming inside, in a sense, into our world, so that we can know him. Yeah.
I guess for me, it's about self-transcendence. It's about meaning, and it's as a parent, I've got 6 kids, and I'm incredibly grateful for the way that they seem to be turning out. My oldest is 21, and I think that faith has anchored them. Faith has given them a direction, a frame of reference, text, tradition. And it helps me when in some difficult decisions, I can look at tradition and teachings and story and law in terms of resolving dilemmas in my own life.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult for me to answer what elements of my belief system are compelling when atheism isn't much of a belief system at all. But to kind of answer it the best I can, I talked in the beginning about reserving belief or trying to scale it with the evidence, and I think there's a very important argument to be made there that through doing that, you kind of build a model of the world that matches reality, and that it's only through trying to match your model of reality with the real world that you can really progress. And there's huge dangers to believing in false things. We have terrorism around the world. There's people making silly business decisions all the time, politics. Loads of decisions are made every day that have real world consequences for believing in things that aren't true. So I think it's very important to scale your beliefs accordingly with the evidence.
Okay. Now, unfortunately, we've run out of time. There were people who did have questions lined up and who wanted to ask them. Maybe if the speakers are interested in chatting, then you could come and approach them at the end. Some people do have to get off to classes now as well, so I'm afraid we do have to wrap up.